With the news of Nissan and Mitsubishi's potential merger into the Honda brand, I wanted to look back on some of the largest auto brands that have gone away and disappeared into the night. Nissan's been around for the better part of 90 years, and while it's facing potentially the largest change in the brand's history, this isn't necessarily new territory for the Japanese brand. In 1934, Nissan acquired DAT, a small company producing trucks and work vehicles, which eventually became Datsun. Datsun was Nissan's foreign export pet name brand and became the only American name that buyers knew until the late 80s due to Nissan's involvement in World War II. The Datsun name remained a household brand even after Nissan removed the name brand in 1982. The brand Datsun is no longer with us, but it left a strong mark in our hearts with cars like the 240Z, a car that stood the test of time, especially after Nissan's merger with Renault in the late 90s. The Skyline, known today as the GTR, Bluebird, which became today's modern Altima, and many, many more. The brand name Nissan may very well meet the same fate that Datsun did in these next few years ahead. So with that, let's take a look back at some of the car manufacturers who've gone away and why. Saab was the thinking man's Scandinavian BMW. Their designs were smart, they were made well, and often were incredibly reliable. They had top-tier models such as the 9.3 Viggen, a front-wheel drive sports car with its eyes set on the likes of BMW's E46 M3 and Mercedes AMG line. Was there a better blue color on a car? I'm not sure. Then we've got other Swedish masterpieces such as the 900 Aero and the Sonnet series from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which could have easily been mistaken for something much more expensive and much more Italian. But why and how, you're asking, did Saab go away if they were so great? Saab has an interesting history. Beginning life as an aerospace company in the 30s, they eventually grew into cars with the Project 92 in 1945. In 1969, they merged with Scania Vebis, which is where we get the name Saab Scania. During this time, the Swedish firm did a number of jointly developed models with manufacturers like Lancia, Alfa Romeo, and Fiat. It was under this time they produced and sold 1,900,000, the most popular model to date. In the late 80s and early 90s, GM became a 50% controller of Saab alongside investor AB, which owned stock in a lot of companies such as pharma giant AstraZeneca, appliance brand Electrolux, and outdoor product manufacturer Husqvarna AB. By 2000, GM maintained total control over the Saab automotive division, spending over $700 million in the process. GM's ownership produced a handful of interesting cars like the 92X and the SUV Saab, the 97X. But the market soured, and in 2009, Saab was essentially bankrupt. Koenigsegg was on the verge of purchasing Saab, as Christian von Koenigsegg is a known lover of Saab's, but they declined on the 11th hour. By 2010, Spyker had purchased Saab for $74 million, as well as $320 million worth of stock to GM, with GM still making some of the engines as well as some of the vehicles. By the following year, Saab was hemorrhaging money, and after a number of bids from Chinese buyers were denied by GM, the once luxurious and strong Swedish brand went into full bankruptcy, leaving an estimated debt of $1.5 million. Let's not get into China and Japan's attempt into making Saab an electric brand in the years after that. Some things just aren't made to last. Next up on the list of brands GM owned and that were supposed to be great but ended up not being so great, and the last brand we'll take a look at today, Pontiac. That's actually not a fair assessment of GM's ownership of Pontiac, since they own the vastly popular American brand since 1926. But this is my video and I'll make totally absurd and wrong takes if I want to. Allow me to read you the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting. Pontiac was initially founded as a buggy company and was eventually marketed as an affordable, low-priced family car. The name reflected the strength and heritage to what it represented of Native American chief, Pontiac. After World War II, Pontiac became a stylish brand of GM's with models like the Silver Streak, Star Chief, Bonneville, and Catalina. By the 60s, with the familiar name of John DeLorean as the chief engineer, Pontiac produced such widely acclaimed hits as the GTO, the Firebird, Grand Prix, and the revamped Bonneville. Pontiac was the muscle car's muscle car, a fan favorite among tough high school dropouts and midlife crisis dads alike. And this was a time you can actually afford a cool American car rather than being buried alive in Challenger and Charger debt. Everyone who wanted a Firebird, which was a lot of people, could actually get one. So if Pontiac made such cool cars, what actually happened? Oil.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
The 1970s brought on new emissions regulations and safety standards, much of which, as you can imagine, the GTO did not meet. 1973 also brought on a severe oil crisis, which forced us Americans to find more fuel-efficient modes of transportation, such as the Toyota Corolla, which made about 37 miles per gallon. Then the 80s brought on a seeming lack of effort as GM essentially just rebranded and rebadged many of their models, and Pontiac became less of a brand and more of an option for the American market. The passion was beginning to wane at HQ, and consumers were quick to be aware of this. Of course, the 80s did bring about the Fiero, a fierce and affordable mid-engine sports car, but even that had its flaws with reliability. Following much of the same issues as the last 2 decades, the 90s and 2000s were even worse for Pontiac. Even with bringing back the GTO and adding the sporty Solstice to the lineup, the people just weren't having it. And while Pontiac was filled with a rich and successful history, a brand that touches nearly every page of the modern American textbook, it wasn't strong enough to withstand GM's bankruptcy in 2009. And along with Hummer and Saturn, Pontiac was seen as not strong enough to keep GM afloat through the unforeseen future. It was survival of the fittest, and Pontiac had only been scratching by for nearly the previous 4 decades. You've got to imagine how great of a deal Oprah got in 2004 with those G6s. Follow along for part 2, where we cover other iconic brands like Oldsmobile, Mercury, and Plymouth.